Donald Trump is watching his legal defense go up in flames before his eyes, as I have an example here for you to discuss. This is huge and devastating for Donald Trump, and it has to do with a likely defense he'll use when it comes to his election interference cases, both federally and in Fulton County, which will likely to be distancing himself from, for example, the fake elector scheme and saying, I wasn't directing them to do all that. Now, sure, they may have been vaguely following my lead in the sense that I was trying to stay president and I was saying that I have some justification to stay in the White House despite my laws, but they were actually engaged in those allegedly unlawful acts on their own. I wasn't directing the specifics of that. Well, that's going to be tough if the people at issue are saying, no, Trump was directing us, which is what we're getting news of here. From Mediaite, Michigan fake elector tells court she acted at the direction of Trump and his lawyers. And I'll explain, because I've seen a few people say we talk a lot about the fake elector scheme. Can you do an in-depth breakdown of what that is? So I'll try to summarize what the fake elector scheme is in just a moment. But first, one of the 16 fake electors indicted this summer in Michigan told the court in a filing Monday that she acted at the direction of former President Donald Trump and his attorneys. The court filing was submitted by lawyer Paul Stablain on behalf of his client Amy Facinello, and on Tuesday, local media called it one of the strongest connections yet between the efforts of the 16 Republicans in Michigan who are now facing felony charges and Trump. So this comes out of the Dana Nessel, Attorney General of Michigan case. She indicted 16 fake electors in the state of Michigan for asserting themselves to be the, quote, duly elected and qualified electors for president and vice president of the United States of America for the state of Michigan in fraudulent, bogus forms. And as Dana Nessel, when announcing this indictment, said, quote, that was a lie. They weren't the duly elected and qualified electors, and each of the defendants knew it. So what they were trying to do, again, to kind of break this down, was through forms such as this, assert themselves to be the lawful elector, as it noted there, the duly elected and qualified elector of the United States for president and vice president of the United States for the state of Michigan. And also you had this in Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Nevada. These forms were not the lawful forms that reflect our constitutional process where the states send electors to cast their vote based on which way the vote went in the state, and then the electors cast their vote in the electoral college. That gives us a formal victor of the national presidential election for president and vice president. No, they were just coming up with their own forms and saying, actually, you should count us as the electors, not the actual electors. And actually, Trump won the state of Michigan, not what the actual electors will say, which is Joe Biden, correctly, as they're being sent through our lawful formal process. But as you can see on screen, they had their own forms, their own fraudulent idea as to how to keep Trump the president. And at least according to Amy Facinello, Donald Trump was directing this alleged criminal conspiracy. He was directing these actions. It wasn't just them trying to do something because they love Trump so much, and he was at the top leading it. They submitted it to Congress, trying to get to Mike Pence, as we've covered extensively, and apparently the National Archives too. Again, these are sworn statements that are lies, proclaiming themselves to be the lawful and duly elected qualified electors of a state when they're not. Again, we have a process for that in relation to the state government of a state sending the electors. That's not what this was. Profoundly anti-democratic. What they're saying and what Trump in directing them is saying is, I know better than the people of my state and the constitutional process within the country and my state. And I should be able to choose who won. I should be able to choose who's the president and vice president, not our lawful, constitutional, democratic process. And quickly, here was the response from one of the fake electors out of Arizona to a question about, why did you think you could do this?
An action is occurred. There is no case law. There's no precedent that exists as to whether or not an election that is currently being litigated in the courts has due standing, which is why we felt it appropriate to provide Congress and the Vice President with dueling opinions.
Did you have direction?
Dueling opinions. That is the most casual way to say such an anti-democratic statement. Because to further depict what this would have been, imagine if it had worked. If Pence, or however they were imagining this going, their electoral votes were counted. They were deemed to be the lawful electors. Mike Pence said, actually, those are the ones I'm supposed to count as the Constitution demands. And then somehow that was accepted and Trump just stayed the president. It didn't reflect the actual lawful process that we have in place to select electors and they cast their vote in the Electoral College, but it just reflected what Trump wanted. Then it would have been, and I know it's hard for this phrase not to be said without it sounding hyperbolic, but this is the moment we're in. That would have been the end of American democracy, at least for the time being, because someone would have won an election and the other person stay president. That's not how democracy works. That would have been horrifying. And that's what this was aimed at doing. So in a very small sense, you have the fraudulent nature of proclaiming yourself to be the duly elected and qualified elected for president and vice president of the United States of America for the state of Michigan and trying to officially submit those forms as lawful forms. But then you have the zoomed out understanding, which is, imagine if it had worked. Imagine if this, along with all the other things, Mike Pence being on board with all these different schemes, local officials doing all sorts of wacky stuff, that would have been absolutely devastating. And so don't let people downplay the significance of what these schemes were aimed at doing. As I see it really is deeply dishonest to do so, because this is as significant as you can possibly get when talking about politics, the very health and existence of our democracy. And that's what schemes like this threatened. And so good for Dana Nessel for holding accountable the fake electors in Michigan. We'll see other states, how they proceed on that as well. And then, of course, the guy at the very top, Donald Trump, in two different cases, may be held accountable. And I will say before we go on this, that defense doesn't seem to be likely to work. If he goes and says, I don't even know anything about this fake elector scheme, fake electors are going to point the finger at him. As we talked about, New Republic reports Mark Meadows may be able to turn against, or may be about to turn against, I should say, Donald Trump. And it notes that he says Donald Trump was focused on the fake elector scheme. That was central to his ambition of staying president. And Mark Meadows is saying the actions I took were because I was afraid of being, quote, yelled at by the president of the United States. And so that seems to be falling apart. His other defense, as he's parading publicly, as we've talked about, is anyone or anybody attacked and indicted by the failed district attorney of Fulton County or deranged Jack Smith will, I assume, and as I will be doing, show how the presidential election of 2020 was rigged and stolen, spelled incorrectly. So if he knows he can't effectively defend himself by saying, I wasn't a part of any of these unlawful acts, they were just doing them themselves, and he resorts to just, the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, best of luck to him, I guess, because that is very, 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 very unlikely to work. Make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show and get a bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, and there's a link in the description.